Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Life in the Ring. This week we're talking with my Uncle Chris, and he is a worship pastor in Indianola, Iowa. I sat down with him and asked him all of my most vulnerable and maybe almost borderline offensive worship questions, if you want to call it that. But he has such a gracious heart and helped me figure out lots of different things that were on my heart about worship and just what's going on. Welcome to my favorite worship pastor, Uncle Chris.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So, some introductory questions to get to know you a little bit better. What would you say your 1,000-foot view testimony is? And don't mind my bed right there.
Yes, 1,000-foot view with the bed above us. Yeah, testimony. So, grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor for a large portion of my life growing up. And have two sisters, one of which is your mom. Was always just surrounded in faith, kind of grew up in and around faith, and specifically gave my life to Christ when I was about 7 years old at a kids camp. Then have obviously grown and had ups and downs, and progressed in my relationship with him since then. So yeah, that's kind of like real broad.
I mean, perfect. I mean, yeah, I'm sure. I mean, mine's very similar.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've learned that, like, it's not about having, I always say, like, yeah, my testimony isn't that cool. Like, I wasn't like hooked on drugs and then like God pulled me out of the drugs or whatever. Like, I just grew up in a Christ-centered home, but that's actually like a testament to like the faithfulness of God through like generational faithfulness, like that He put me in a spot where my parents were, intentional over their relationship and spread that relationship with Christ to me. So,
and then so being in faith, what was your first moment or first worship encounter that you were like, wow, this is awesome, like, or whatever that kind of moment was?
Sure, yeah. I would say just worship in general. I think it was probably tied pretty closely to my love for music. So when I really kind of latched onto the drums when I was young, I started when I was about 10 years old. There was a drum set at the church that my dad would arrange chairs on Saturday, and I'd go with him and I would just smack the set kind of randomly, not knowing at all what I'm doing. And I'm sure he loved that. That was probably not annoying at all for him. That was kind of a central element there. Just having interest in music and then kind of growing in my love for music, from drums to guitar to piano to other things. And then being able to kind of, use that ability and skill that God has given me to sing and help lead worship eventually.
And so who were your influences to really help build you up into being a worship pastor?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah. I would say probably the biggest influences on my life were really my dad. My dad was a significant factor in the sense that he was willing to kind of listen and hear me out as I kind of processed what it looked like to even be in ministry, as he was obviously in ministry as well, and thinking through worship music and hearing my terrible, whatever was coming out of the guitar or whatnot, of the drums, and just kind of steadily being faithful and encouraging me forward in that process.
Sorry, taking notes.
Yeah, of course, you're good.
And so my grandpa's faith.
Right. Yep.
What was the best piece of encouragement that he gave you? Or that you've received along your ministry route? I guess we'll encompass all churches.
Yeah. I think I have always kind of struggled with self-confidence in a lot of ways, just not being so sure that I could do like the things I wanted to do. And there was actually a pastor at a church I was interning for in college was actually your dad's church at the time. His worship pastor I interned for, and I just kind of basically asked him straight up, like, hey, do you think I'm capable of doing this, like actually being a worship pastor and like leading music from the music side of things, and he was like, oh, absolutely, dude, you've got a great solid foundation to grow from. And that was like, okay, like a comforting reality of like being able to say like, okay, I maybe God does want me to do this, as opposed to like, feeling like you're on American Idol and like, ooh, that guy should not be singing and doing the things he's doing, kind of thing. So
Was that Billy?
that was Billy. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Billy Lloyd.
And so now the introduction's out of the way.
Okay. Yes.
Into the more so theological pieces of it. I'm a lot more animated than I was with my dad.
Sure.
What does connecting with God through worship look like for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's important to define worship in that question, because it can be easy to assume that worship is only, it's kind of limited to church and limited to singing and limited to just the musical side of things, which obviously worship is absolutely happening, in that gathered context on a Sunday morning or whatever when we meet for church. But worship really is like the lens by which we view the world. Like it is a way of our lives. We say that, at my church right now, like that's a central measure of our church, is worship is a way of life. And so just being aware of that, it most definitely you can connect with God through music, and in the gathered body, when the church body is singing and declaring truths, that are rooted in Scripture, you can sense Him and connect with Him in that reality. But like I said, it's a way of life. When I get home from work and my little girl gives me a big hug because she's excited to see me, like those are moments where I can see God in that space and I can connect with Him there. I can worship Him in that space as well. So that's just when I think of connecting with God in worship, I try not to limit and box myself into only a Sunday morning gathering, but rather just life in general.
Sorry, still writing. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You're doing
But
great.
and so on the personal side of things, at Evangel we have 2 chapels a week, and so that's very much a very similar Sunday morning kind of setting.
Mhm.
But then they also encourage us to be part of a church, and so then there's a young adults service, then there's a Sunday morning service, and so there's 4 services that I'm going to in a week.
Wow.
And so in each and every worship setting, I always kind of find myself during a piece of a song or whatever, thinking, oh, what else do I have to do today? Is there, or how do you think I should handle that and try and lock back in?
Yeah. I think it's important. You're basically saying like your mind is kind of drifting. You're just kind of zoning out a little bit sometimes when you're doing the things. First of all, 4 services a week is a lot for anybody. Like that's insane. So, but I mean, also provides a lot of opportunities for cool ways to learn and grow, I imagine, in your walk with Christ. But yeah, when it comes to kind of drifting or kind of losing your train of thought, or just kind of sort of zoning out or whatnot, I think it's important to give yourself grace, first of all, because that is not uncommon. We live in an ADHD culture. I think the average attention span is like 5 seconds now because of TikTok and all these video streaming. Our attention is going down the drain. Our attention spans, that is. So I think it's important just to give yourself grace in that regard. And then I think the next question or the next point would be to pray in that moment and say, God, help me kind of lock back in here. Like would you help me, Spirit, in this moment, to not just go through the motion of doing the thing, but to be present to whatever's being sung, or the message you're listening to, or whatever it might be. And then just thinking on, as you think on the truths that you're either singing or you're hearing, it's hard not to, when you've had a personal encounter with God, it's hard not to be moved to reverence and to joy and to worship when you consider the God of the universe that we're able to sing to and connect with and commune with through His Spirit and through His Son. So yeah, that's probably kind of what I would do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so a little bit on the lighter side, how do you decide a set list, and is there any reason behind it?
Yeah. So as far as deciding a set list, quote unquote, for a morning, there are a couple kind of lenses that I think through. Number one is we think through like what we call the 3 G's of the gospel, and that is the glory of God, the gravity of our sin, and the grandeur of His grace. And so I kind of want to ensure that gets communicated in some form or fashion. Those elements get communicated in some form or fashion throughout a morning, throughout a service as a whole. And so typically those first couple songs, it's really intentional about the glory of God. We're declaring who God is and what He's done. We don't want to necessarily start our service off with a surrender song, because we don't necessarily know, not that we don't know, but we haven't declared or established, I should say, who God is in that moment. We haven't established who we're surrendering to. So it's important to kind of, for those first 2 songs or so, first couple songs, just establishing who God is, what He's done. He is King, He's on the throne, kind of thing. And then you kind of move through that, whether it's a read confession or, in the song, there are songs out there that kind of approach confession and just being aware of the gravity of our sin, our need for Him, kind of thing. And then just reveling in His grace, sitting in, resting in what He's done on the cross. Those are kind of the 3 things I think through when I'm kind of crafting music and songs for a set. And then the other factor is what's being communicated as far as the message, the central content that's going to be communicated from the pastor. Usually the text I know well ahead of time. And so as far as like what scripture we're going to be kind of working through. And so I read that and pray through that and think through that. And then, I ask God to kind of help me kind of craft the music around that, again, with those 3 G's in mind as well. So.
Awesome. Through 4 services, I've kind of picked up on, I'll call it the Nashville mindset of a concert, start everybody off really happy.
Yeah.
And then kind of bring it down, then like one last big bridge, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's kind of the classic formula for sure.
And then, so when we raise our hands, it's dignified as surrender. And whenever I do it, it always feels kind of blank or empty. So what do you, like when we're supposed to do this physically, how do we change our heart posture towards it, would you say, in a worship setting?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think I kind of gather what you're saying. I think the big thing to think about and consider and remember when it comes to worshiping God is that worship and experiencing God is not about you or about me or about any other person in the room. It's about God, right? And so to overanalyze and overconsider how do I look? Am I doing it right? Am I looking the right way? Are people, thinking I'm worshiping or not worshiping? Is an easy way to get our mind not on the right thing, right? We want to put our minds on Christ, on God, on the one we're worshiping, the object of our worship, not necessarily the means of our worship, how we're worshiping, right? And so I think that's important. And so when you consider who God is, again, like I said earlier, it's hard not to be moved to authentically worship Him and authentically engage in that worship. Now, that's going to look different for everybody. People are going to worship God in different physical ways. So I don't necessarily ascribe to the fact that you have to raise your hands. I understand that there's multiple, there's bunch of traditions out there that would maybe encourage different ways to kind of posture ourselves bodily before God. And those are not bad things at all to do, but to call them requirements is, I think, maybe a little dogmatic, again, a little limiting, to say that you're only really worshiping God if your hands are in the air, or you're only really worshiping God if you're bowed straight down, head to the ground kind of thing. We can encounter God in many different ways, and he's a God who is contextual. He's going to meet each of us in different spaces and in different ways, and each of us will be led to respond perhaps in our own way, if that makes sense.
I've never heard it be put as contextual, so thank you for a new outlook.
Absolutely.
And then along with our outcry of surrender or whatever, what does surrender look like for you?
For me personally, I think surrender, that's a big question. I think ultimately it's about just opening ourselves to God, opening all of ourselves to God. So I think of Romans 12:1 or whatnot, which is basically offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. And that idea of complete openness, if you will, like humble, I think is a word that comes to mind. I don't want to approach him with my own agenda at play, thinking I'll worship you as long as we're doing the right song, or as long as I'm in a good mood, or whatever it is. If I'm surrendered, I'm surrendered. My hands are open, and I'm going to worship him no matter what. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then how do you recognize God's presence? Whether you're leading or whether you're in the crowd. Like, I've always thought it was the goosebumps feel, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it is. That is it's a hard thing to put your finger on, if it is a goosebumps or not a goosebump. I think he definitely can reveal himself in that way, and you can experience him with that. That's, we call that like an emotional response. You're emotionally responding, and so therefore, you have the goosebumps, and he's present, and that's absolutely true and valid, a valid perception. But I think ultimately it's intangible. It's hard you can't really put a word on it, or put you don't want to, again, I keep coming back to this theme. You don't want to box it into like, okay, if I have goosebumps, then I've met God. If I don't have goosebumps, then I haven't met God. That's again, just too dogmatic and too limiting, I think. And so you just have to, be present to him. I mean, he's made himself present to me in many different ways, through prayer, through personal interaction, through music, again, the emotional movement of a song, and, the bridge kind of getting bigger or whatnot, the dynamics of music, but also, in the stillness, when I'm just driving in my car, I connect, I sense him. It's a sense, you know what I mean? That's why I keep saying it's intangible. It's hard to like put into words, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's our deep theological session.
All right.
You ready for rapid fire?
Oh, bring it on, dude.
What song release were you super excited to learn how to play? Or you heard it was coming, you're like, I gotta learn that one. That's a good question. There's a lot, man. It's like hard to nail down to just one. Probably, I could go way back. I could go old school for you, like "Our God" by Chris Hallam, way back in the day. I remember that's an oldie.
Just like being like, dude, I'm excited. I'm pumped for that. And we played that. We wore that song out, to say the least, back in the day. But like a lot of times, most new songs that we're introducing, I'm excited to kind of bring up. We've introduced a song called "Living God" recently at our church, and I just get pumped to sing and declare. We worship a living God kind of thing, and so yeah, I think probably trying to think if there's any other ones that are like big that you would know, because I think of a lot of songs. We don't do a lot of like the top 40 worship songs or whatnot, and so trying to think of ones that we did Holy Forever is kind of a big one that's going on right now, and we did that one recently, and yeah, I'll leave it at that, I guess.
And so, what is now your favorite instrument to play? It was drums way back then.
I know, dude. That's still I think I still have to say drums, dude. I actually just played drums this past Sunday.
Oh, nice.
Somebody else was leading worship, and it was a blast. Like I'm so comfortable on them. It's so like I just slide in, just kind of do my thing. And guitar is still very fun. I still love it, but there is something about the drums that just rocks, dude.
And then instrumentally, what is your favorite part to play of any song, or like whatever part's coming up, guitar solo, whatever, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I would say probably the bridge in most songs has enough fun. Like I said earlier, like there's a classic formula of worship music.
Mm-hmm.
Like typically there's like, kind of a down first verse, little present chorus, and a more down second verse, then more present chorus, and then really down for the bridge, and that slowly builds up to this really big overarching kind of like, and then you hit it really hard back into the chorus. That's always a good time. I enjoy those builds for sure. Whether on drums or guitar, it's just a good time.
Yeah. And then for our last question, kind of off topic in a sense, but who is your favorite secular artist and song?
Do you know this?
I have a pretty good idea.
You have an idea? I'm gonna go with John Mayer on that. That's probably what you were thinking. He was a strong influence for me as far as guitar was concerned. I would just throw his songs on and like just try and play along, and literally grew so much as a guitar player, just playing horrible versions of his songs. And then as far as a song, he's got so many, man.
Last I remember, it was Rosie.
Dude, Rosie, so good. Either Rosie, Slow Dancing in a Burning Room is a really good one, and Heart of Life is like maybe my own little like guilty pleasure, but yeah, he's got a ton of good stuff. So yeah, I'll give you those three.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
He helped me figure out lots about worship in this conversation, and it's also very beneficial to have someone in our corner, kind of like what the heart about this podcast is that we all need someone in our corner to help navigate big decisions, life, career, calling, Jesus, everybody. And he learned a lot from the people in his corner, like his dad and Billy, the worship leader at his internship. But really, it's the heart behind it. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll have some more on the way soon.